Do you know, I was coming on here today to bring you my full positive review of Your Lie in April, which I only got to see in the West End for the first time over the weekend because I was out of the country during its official opening. And almost exactly as I sat down to film this review and tell you how much I really love this show and really hope that people go and see it this summer and support this piece of theatre, I got the news come through on my phone that it is sadly closing over a month early at the Harold Pinter Theatre and will play its final West End performance on August 11th. So I'm still going to bring you my review of this show. I'm still going to share my thoughts with you about why I love it so much, but those are now going to be in a slightly different context. And we're also going to talk about why the production is closing early and the enduring challenges that producers in the West End still face. So here is why I loved Your Lie in April and why, in spite of that, it's closing early. Oh my god, hey, welcome back. My name is Mickey Joe. I am obsessed with all things theatre. I am a professional theatre critic here on social media. Hello to you if you're listening to this on podcast platforms. Hello to you if you're watching this on my theatre-themed YouTube channel. If you don't yet subscribe to me on YouTube, make sure to do so because I also share, as well as reviews, theatrical breaking news like I'm doing right now, also theatre-going vlogs, interviews, and all sorts of other theatre-related content, which is something I also do on other social media platforms. In fact, it was earlier this year on Instagram that I first spoke about Your Lie in April because I was invited to go and see a concert version of the show, but I was holding off creating a full video review until I got to see its inevitable West End production. Now, if you don't know, Your Lie in April is a musical adaptation of the manga and anime of the same name. It's all about the healing power of music and what it means to kind of create a legacy of memory through the musical performances that you give to others. It is well known as a manga that is heartbreakingly sad, and like Death Note, it is another to be turned into a musical with a score by Frank Wildhorn, whose work you may also know from Jekyll and Hyde, Bonnie and Clyde, Wonderland. And though Death Note was the first of the two to get a concert production here in the UK, Your Lie in April made it to the West End first, opening earlier this month at the Harold Pinter. And while it wasn't scheduled to play an especially long run at the venue in the first place, this kind of a shock sudden closing announcement after such a short amount of time is not something we're used to seeing in London. This is very much more of a Broadway kind of a thing. So today, like I said, I'll be letting you know my thoughts on the show, as well as a little bit of a speculation as to why this might be happening. If you do enjoy this review and you want to stay abreast of all the theatre news, like I said, make sure to subscribe to me here on YouTube, go find me on other social media platforms, and please, please, please comment down below with all of your thoughts about Your Lie in April. If you have any insights of your own as to why the show might be closing early, feel free to share those. But in particular, if you went to see this show in the West End, let us know what you thought. In the meantime, here are my thoughts on Your Lie in April. So while I don't think it's as enormously popular, I enjoyed this musical adaptation more than I enjoyed Death Note. And I think much of the reason for that is because this is a story that lends itself more to theatrical adaptation. Like Death Note is very fantastical and has a lot of like moral themes and questions and quandaries, and there's a lot going on, and there's a lot of like fantastical elements and these fantasy godlike creatures. Your Lie in April is an awful lot more down to earth, and it concerns itself around music, and that kind of a story is a gift to a composer because they get to do something very interesting with the score. Now, what Frank Wildhorn has done here is incorporated a lot of classical music themes as well as entire sections of classical music into his score, which is written with much of his recognizable contemporary style. If you don't know Frank Wildhorn's work, I would characterize it with a lot of lush romance. He writes an epic, sweeping, romantic power ballad. He writes remarkable I Want songs. I mean, This Is the Moment from Jekyll and Hyde still stands there as one of the greatest musical theatre I Want songs of all time, and there are a handful of really great unrequited love songs in this show as well. He's given us some of musical theatre's best duets, and many of his songs do have this often melodramatic, perhaps slightly camp, but deeply romantic quality. Now, the plot of this show follows its protagonist Kosei Arima, who was a former child prodigy musician. He won all of the competitions. He was the only entrant in history to achieve a perfect score. He was revered by all of his contemporaries, and then he stopped competing after the death of his mother because he thought it was his fault that she died. She was always incredibly overbearing and incredibly hard on him, and basically told him that nothing he achieved was ever enough and he always needed to do more. And after her death, he found that he was no longer able to hear the music specifically from a piano, so he couldn't play anymore. He'd also convinced himself in his grief that he had no interest in playing anymore. This despite the protestations of his friends Watari and Tsubaki, who secretly held a candle for him. This all changes, however, with the arrival of a new student who Tsubaki introduces to the group because she says that she has a crush on Watari, who is like a big sports star of the school. Her name is Kaori, and she has a secret agenda because we come to find out that she is a violinist who is also entering these young musician competitions, and she asks Kosei, after he goes and sees her perform and is taken aback by the fact that she performs with real passion and emotion that, make the performance deeply inspiring and enjoyable to watch, but detract from her overall score, because the competition rewards musicianship that is precise and accurate and not necessarily emotive. You're not meant to play with feeling. But she asks Kosei if he will accompany her at her next performance. He explains that he can't hear the music anymore, but she pushes him to do so anyway. Over the course of the plot, we can see that he comes to care very deeply about her. We also come to realise that there is more going on with her than we first realised. But the two of them have a profound impact on each other as we explore what music means to each of them. I want to tell you a little bit more about this score and its character. I really love the songs. It's Just Like a Movie and Where's My Superhero. These are unrequited love songs sung by Kosei and Tsubaki respectively. Both of them just gorgeous. I do think there are a few too many entire ensemble numbers. I don't know if this show needs to have as many people in the cast as it does. I feel like we could find a more interesting way of telling this story that really just focuses on this central quartet of young characters. And even Tsubaki and Watari, have had more of their material cut in the early previews of the West End run. He used to have a song all about a football game that didn't end the way that he wanted, and there used to be another scene where Tsubaki gets injured and Kosei carries her to the football game, I believe. But the focus now seems even sharper on Kosei and Kaori. We do have still a handful of just general we're at school and it's the summer soon and our lives are ahead of us songs, and every time we go into one of these music competitions, it is consistently every single time we go there it's established with another this is a defining moment, this is really intense, we care very deeply about this songs, and it's well written. They are good songs. I just think there's a few too many of them and it shifts our focus when we want to spend a little bit more time. It's particularly in dialogue. There's more that we want these characters to say to each other, and it's all a little bit tortured. But there are also things that you get when you adapt from manga, because the emotional spectrum is very broad and it is sometimes challenging to put that on stage in a way that feels grounded and realistic and natural. One example of this is the 180 in characterization of Kosei's mother, who every time we see her in flashbacks is sort of traumatizingly cruel to him, and then with no explanation, right towards the end, he asks her a question and she says something incredibly tender and poignant about having to embrace the sorrows that make up love. And it's that recollection that eventually helps him process his grief, but it doesn't really feel motivated by any explanation. Were those earlier memories of his mother false and clouded by his sort of own negative headspace about the whole thing? Or does it just feel as unrealistic as it looks? What I will say is that while adapting manga and anime to the stage presents its challenges, it also offers a lot of exciting theatrical opportunities. And Frank Wildhorn is really one of the great composers in terms of bringing this to the stage in a really thrilling way. Never more so than in the stirring Act 2 duets, Catch a Shooting Star and 100,000 Million Stars, where his soaring melodies are beautifully met by the lyrics, written by Carly Robin Green and Tracy Miller. I want to tell you briefly about some of the beautiful creative choices made for this production, and I do think that this is director and choreographer Nick Winston's best work on stage. What he can achieve in a concert production is remarkable, but in the journey from that version to this in the West End, it's just grown and blossomed even more. These characters are brought to life with such animation, pardon the pun, but they are so vivid, they are so clear to us. We instantly understand who every single person is. Even characters we only hear from a couple of times at these music festival competitions, we know exactly who they are. They are so wonderfully presented, and the pace of the whole thing flows like a gentle stream, caressing every single emotional beat that we need to hit along the way. It is so heartfelt, it is so beautiful, it is just the right amount of sentimental and heartbreaking and devastating, and I sobbed my eyes out the first time I saw this performed fully. I think he's done really beautiful work here, as has Justin Williams on the set design. My god, this set design This is absolutely stunning and beautiful and clever and gives them so many levels on which to play. It creates so many different locations while still being static. We have the grand piano in the middle that turns on a turntable and opens itself when it needs to. That's magical and majestic all by itself. But then we have this beautiful bridge structure that they can climb onto and that they can leap off of. We have this cherry blossom design motif. The panels at the back even projecting the title onto a black cloth before the performance, alternately in Japanese and then in English. It's just very careful, clever attention to detail. Possibly the show's most important creative aspect, however, is the music. The music supervisor for this production is the brilliant Katie Richardson. The musical director and conductor is the also brilliant Chris Poon. And it's really gorgeous work. It sounds fantastic. The musical arrangements for this score have been done by Jason Howland of The Great Gatsby on Broadway fame, by the way, but it absolutely yanks at the heartstrings. It's so affecting. It is so uplifting. It is then so sad. And they have the additional challenge of the way that music presents itself in the plot. So Cowrie being a violinist, a member of the band, a violinist, then plays on stage, with this being indicated that this is Cowrie's performance being created by one of the show's musicians. When Kosei finally plays the piano, however, leading man Jung Si-young actually plays it himself and displays extraordinary musicianship. Where in many musicals you would get this big Act 2 standout solo number of realization for a protagonist, he instead puts all of that passion, all of that energy, all of that characterization and that turning point emotionally into a stunning classical piano performance that he plays live and is just incredible. I mean, he's a remarkably talented young man. To find someone who can embody this role with as much grief and optimism and love and despair and sing it with such passion and such pain and then play the piano as magnificently as he does. He's a remarkable talent, and the way that he carries this show is just extraordinary. But if that's not enough, he is matched in this West End run by some equally extraordinary talent. I really loved Rumi Sutton's performance in the concert production, I will add to this, and I was very sad that she couldn't do the full West End run. But Mia Kobayashi, just as fantastic as Cowrie, and has the most abundant star quality. My goodness. One of those performers on stage who just feels so breathtakingly special, and everything that she brings to this role, she's one as well who implicitly understands the tone of anime and how to make that work on stage, because it is quite extreme, and she has a handful of moments where she says something very dramatic, or she is alternately like incredibly angry and then sort of giggles it off, and she makes it work. She doesn't make it feel pantomime and silly. She makes it all feel natural and like she's constantly on the brink of tears, but also deliberately furnishing her own joy. Her vocals are some of the best in the show, and it just comes back to star quality. She is mesmerizing to watch, and absolutely someone who deserves to go very far after this show. And there is wonderful support as well. I so much enjoy Rachel Claire Chan's performance as Tsubaki. She is so funny, she is so grounding, so charming, and then we get this beautiful, sad insight into her own unrequited feelings for her friend when she sings Where's My Superhero. That's a really beautiful moment in the show. Dean John Wilson, also very funny, also very charming as Watari. I do wonder that he reads just that little bit older than everyone else. I don't think the way he's costumed or the way his hair is styled necessarily helps, because he just looks a little bit older. I don't know that I thought this in the concert version. By the time it got to the West End, I was starting to notice it a little bit more. Someone who is not necessarily old enough for their role, but makes it work on stage, Lucy Park. My goodness, she's playing Kosei's mother in flashbacks. An incredible performance of remarkable power. She only has a few moments, but my goodness does she make the most of them. Finally, seen even more briefly, but making a sizable impression, Erica Posadas and Ernest Stroud, who play two other competitive musicians who are shook by Kosei Arima's return to the music world. So with me having said all of those positive things, why is this production closing? And I don't think it's faultless. I think there is room for this to be improved, and I don't necessarily think that it was delivering in such a way that it had audiences leaving the theatre going, oh my gosh, I must go back and see that 10 more times and I must tell all of my friends about it. And word of mouth is really important for these shows early in their lives, especially shows that have arrived quite suddenly in the West End. You know, Death Note was in concert, summer last year, early September. This one was produced in April, as would make sense. It's called Your Lie in April. And then this one managed to get a West End run, presumably just because there was a theatre available. Everyone was expecting Death Note to come in first. Everyone was quite surprised this came in as quickly as it did. Was this rushed to the stage? I think the final product they ended up with was creatively very beautiful. And, you know, they had a really fantastic cast. Do I think if it had been workshopped, it could have been tightened and improved even more? I think something about the very beginning of the show and the very ending of the show, it kind of stifles the emotional impact that it could have, but certainly those moments, Mia's performance and his performance, and also the way that Youngshi plays the piano, that is such a moment within this show. I don't know why more people haven't gone and booked a bunch more tickets and told their friends about it, because I have been so excited to see this show when I got back to the country. This is also, I guess, unless I'm forgetting something, you know, one of the first major musical adaptations of a manga in the West, in either the West End or on Broadway. Yes, we've had My Neighbor Totoro and Spirited Away, but those are adaptations of already hugely popular anime films, and yes, Your Lie in April became an anime as well. I just wonder if there is a lesson to be found here about the extent to which these narratives maybe need to be a little bit more expanded for the stage. There is something to be said in a very faithful adaptation that is going to mean a lot to the fans. At the same time, could we deliver a slightly more well-rounded, a slightly more rewarding plot for a West End musical if we gave the characters a little bit more depth, if we spent a little bit more time with them? I do often feel like moments of this are the most obvious way of adapting them in terms of how the script is written, in terms of how the story is structured. We just go from that scene to that scene to that scene, and I think there are more interesting devices that we could use. The way that some memories are utilized in the show, it all plays out in quite a traditional way, and it's such a creative premise, and music is such a force in it. I feel like, especially in the context of musical theatre, something even more interesting could be happening here. All of that is to explain why the word of mouth hasn't necessarily been as electric as the production might have hoped, but I am still surprised that the title of this show hasn't sold it. And that's something else we need to look into, because it's not the people who are seeing this show that you need to worry about. It's all of the people who haven't booked tickets yet. And occasionally when these things close early, there are other factors involved. In this instance, it does seem as though they simply just weren't selling enough tickets and they didn't have strong enough advance sales to get them through the summer. I wonder, does this not really feel like a summer holidays show? Does this feel more like a wintry show? Does this feel more like a spring show? I mean, April's in the title, but that shouldn't necessarily tether it to only being able to sell in a specific month. From what I can remember, the first night of the concert at Drury Lane sold well. The performances the next day did not, which is very different to Death Note, which sold incredibly well last year at the London Palladium and then again another West End theatre. And you're going to have to help me in the comments here because I'm a theatre person. I do not know enough about manga. Is Death Note a hugely more popular title than Your Lie in April? I certainly see much more merchandising around Death Note and around those characters. I was aware of the name Death Note before. I had never heard of Your Lie in April before I went to go see this concert, but then subsequently I thought I had gathered that it was quite well known. Then we come back to the marketing of it all. Did enough people know that this was even happening? Did it connect to those communities? And they did something with their posters on the Underground where they were using Japanese worded posters to begin with, which I thought was really clever, you know, trying to engage directly with those communities. And if you are a Japanese speaking person in the UK and you see a Japanese ad on the Underground, you're going to focus on that. You're going to see it and go, oh my gosh, because, you know, that's not the language that most things on the Underground are in. Most of it's in English. At the same time, that is not the majority of people who could be seeing your marketing and advertising on the London Underground. So does that sort of present its own challenges at the same time? It's a difficult thing to do in trying to find that audience and trying to build an audience for the theatre who are predominantly fans of something else. The question becomes, what did Death Note do right that Your Lie in April didn't quite manage to do? And Death Note hasn't attempted a full West End run yet. I don't think this bodes poorly for Death Note. I think hopefully they will try and make it to the stage. I still think Your Lie in April is the better narrative because it feels more theatrically potent, but Death Note seems to be more popular, seems to be an easier sell. I also want to celebrate the casting of Your Lie in April, which I believe was the first entirely South Asian cast of a West End musical, which is fantastic and should be celebrated. It also, by virtue of that, meant that there were no like household name recognizable stars in the show, which is another thing that's going to make it harder to sell. But it's all really heartbreaking because they were not in a big West End house. They were at the Harold Pinter. We are doing something very wrong in the theatre industry if a show like this that has as much merit as this does cannot sell that space. I suppose what really ought to have happened here is it ought to have connected to its pre-built-in audience of fans of the manga, of the anime, who hopefully would have wanted to go and see this on stage. And this is something they were just starting to try and tap into. They were adding these cosplay performances on Sundays. And you know, they performed at West End Live. They were doing all of these things that you need to do to get a new musical off the ground, and they had the great launch pad that was these tryout concerts at Theatre Royal Drury Lane. A lot of people will have seen those, and I thought it went really well. So this does make me nervous about the concept of a show based on an already popular title that, you know, doesn't have starry casting and isn't able to run at one of London's smaller theatres. Was this wounded by the fact it only got lukewarm 3- and 4-star reviews by some of the major outlets? Meanwhile, you have a show like Shrek the Musical that is running at one of the biggest theatres in London that seems to be selling well enough despite the fact that it got terrible reviews. In this instance, perhaps there are other factors at play, but in the meantime, Your Lie in April is not yet closed. It is still playing until August the 11th. I implore you to go and see this show. I really love it. I think it's beautiful. It speaks to me profoundly. I really do think it's a gorgeous piece of theatre that draws from really interesting source material that we don't see adapted often, and does it in a very loving and faithful and honest way, and tells a beautiful story. And features some great songs. If what I have described in this review video sounds like a show that you would like to go and see, please, please, please buy a ticket and go and support this fantastic, phenomenal, talented cast during their final few weeks of performances. In the meantime, that's all I got. Those are all the insights that I have about why Your Lie in April is closing prematurely, despite the fact that I enjoyed it as much as I did. Please let me know in the comment section down below what you thought of the show if you've had the chance to go and see it, and any other ideas that you might have about why this show has struggled in the West End. I hope you enjoyed this review. If you did, make sure to subscribe or follow me wherever you are seeing or hearing this one, and I hope that everyone is staying safe and that you have a stagey day. For 10 more seconds, I'm Mickey Joe Theatre. Oh my god, hey, thanks for watching, have a stagey day. Subscribe!